But nonetheless, these are the people that we look at as the foundation of America. Then there is what we call the silent generation. Why do we call them the silents? Because they are sandwiched between the GIs on the one hand and boomers on the other. You don't get left much to say when you're there. Then we have the boomers, my generation. The boomers believe that we're the first generation that ever really mattered. Which is kind of interesting, because in 400 BC, Hesiod said, I'm sorry, 800 BC, Hesiod said, "I fear for today's generation. They dance wild dances, they're disrespectful to their elders, they don't really pay much attention to anything, they're noisy, and if this is the future, we are toast." That was 800 BC, so it keeps repeating. Okay? The next generation is the millennial generation. Millennials, I'm sorry, Gen X. Gen X basically is people over the age of 30 but younger than boomers. These are people who are beginning to come to that important critical stage of being leaders in your own votaries. You need to pay attention to who they are. The next generation is my daughter's generations, the millennials. The millennials are about, the oldest of them is 30, but the scary thing is the youngest are in their teens. So they really represent a long range. And what I need to tell you is the next generation is Homelands, is called. The Homeland generation. The guys who made this up obviously paid attention to 9/11 and 9/11. Homeland generation. These are 6 generations. Never happened before, because people didn't live long enough. You only had if you're 45 years old, you never saw more than 3 generations. I saw my son, I saw my father, and then it's me. Now we can see the window. And a wonderful and fascinating thing has happened now that we can see the whole system. I'm just going to talk very quickly about how these generations differ. So for example, look at the generational differences on the idea of education. The GIs believed that education was a dream, a hope, not a probability. I don't know if you guys know, only 27% of Americans have actually achieved college and above. We think it's everybody. It's only 27%. And the GIs, it was a lot lower than that. For silents, education was a privilege, something that you had to pay for by being good at it, by learning properly, by returning, by being a good student. Boomers came along, yep, education is my birthright. I'm also entitled to a college loan, which I may or may not pay back. Generation X was the first generation in American history that turned the idea of generation on its side. Up until then, the idea of education was to become a better person, to become a fuller person, to be the best you could possibly be. Millennials were the first generation that wanted to know the connection between an education and a job they were going to have. Became essentially technical school for everyone. Okay? Technical school. I happen to have a Jesuit education, by the way. They didn't think that way. Then there's a Homeland generation. The Homeland generation looks at education as life in and of itself. That life is education. I just speak to you in a 5-minute signal, so as, what was it, who's that? Betty with the big eyes.
Davis.
Betty Davis, she said in that movie, you know, hang on to your seatbelts, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Okay, the important thing you need to know about generations. Generations are cyclical. There are 2 guys who have figured out, by going back 27 generations, that there are only 4 types of generations, and they keep repeating themselves. We never caught on, because we only see 3 at any time. And it works. So what basically it means is that the generation of millennials is a mirror image, only different, of GIs. And if you're really paying attention to the millennials, who are people between under 30 and over 12, something like that, these people are responsible, only in different ways. They are eager to help, only in different ways. But if you want to recruit millennials to your clubs, start looking at how they relate to their grandparents, because that's who they relate to, because they are exactly the same people. And in the same way, those of you really looking ahead to the future, start thinking about the Homeland generation. They're going to be a lot like the silent generation. So go back and find everything you can about the GI generation, put a modern twist on it, and you now have a roadmap for recruiting millennials. And why not? The first of the Homelands are already 12, 13, so they're getting to the point where they may be members of Interact or whatever. Recognize that they essentially are silent, the silent generation. Okay? And then finally, I'm going to leave you in a very short time I have with the biggest gift I can give you, a formula for your own future. Do this and you will have the future you deserve. Some of you wonder, what is the future? It's stuff that happens. Well, it's not. The future is a product of your very specific actions. And here's the formula for the future. The formula for the future goes like this. The future is equal to I to E, which is another way of saying the sum of your intentions elevated by the energy that you apply against them. The trick is pretty simple, but it's actually very challenging. You need to know what the heck your intentions are. Be very clear about it. The American economy, for an example, is a figment of our collective imagination. We need to stop and be careful about what we think, don't you think? So in the same vein, if you want the future to be your future, be clear about what your intentions are. And secondly, don't have too many good ideas. Each idea drains energy from your pool. If you have one idea, all your energy can go into that idea. If you have 10 ideas, you got to divide up the energy. Ideas do not, let me repeat, ideas do not create energy, they suck it up. So limit the number of ideas you have. So that's it. The formula of the future is the intentions, well, not exactly. Because the other component of the formula for the future is awareness. Awareness of the fact that others have intentions. Others are putting energy against them, and they are dividing your intentions. So let's be kind of blunt here. Your intentions are to recruit all the really good people of character who want to do good things and service the community, etc., 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 etc. How many other organizations in your town are doing pretty much the same thing? Okay? So one of the things that you really need to get to at the end is not a vision, not a value statements, but basically what you need is a good cop. Every organization, whether it is a for-profit or not-for-profit organization, needs a good cop. A cop is a central operating premise. Not who you want to be, but how you're going to do that. Let me give you an example of a wonderful central operating premise. If I asked you folks, what is the central operating premise that has kept Coca-Cola on track since 1946, how many of you would know the answer to that question? Right. Nothing to do with flavor, nothing to do with taste, nothing to do with joy, none of that. In 1946, the then chairman figured out that the central operating premise of the Coca-Cola company should be put a Coke within an arm's length of everyone on the planet. They have not deviated from that, no matter what you see publicly. So Coca-Cola is not in the fruit juice business, it's not in the taste business, it is in the distribution, distribution, distribution. So my parting words, my end to you is, as an organization, service above self might work, but as you go down to the specific club level, you need to understand what should be the central operating premise of your particular club. It's going to be different because the culture of your community and your membership is going to be different. And when you recruit somebody, you really ought to have that statement figured out. And by the way, it's no more than one sentence. So that when they say, well, what would I do if I join Rotary? What will I be about? You have the answer. Service above self is great. But today, because loyalty is not the same, aspiration is not the same, people will say, and? So if you got a good cop, you'll have the answer to that. Your future will be bright. God bless you. Live long and prosper. Thank you very much.